You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We're very pleased to have Frank Gaffney joining us. He is the president with the Center for Security Policy. Frank Gaffney, it's a pleasure to have you joining us today on the Final Say Radio Show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, we've got a few very important stories to discuss. If we can get into some of the new information being released, and you guys have been reporting on this so well since it has happened, and that is Benghazi and some of the witnesses that are going to be coming to Washington this week to testify.
This is a very much still unfolding drama, and I think this week may be a critical one in its course. The hearing that you're talking about is going to take place on Wednesday before the House Government Oversight and Reform Committee, chaired by Darrell Issa. And he has got three witnesses who are fairly senior people in the State Department who have evidently decided they're going to come forward and break ranks with the kind of party line that has been established and sustained for basically the past 8 months, just about, since this attack went down. This jihadist attack went down in Benghazi, Libya, on September 11th, 2012. This is one of, as I say, several developments. We've been told that some of the people who were actually there in Benghazi, none of these three witnesses were, but some who were, who have been threatened. I don't know if it's been physically threatened, but at the very least threatened with job action if they came forward and spoke about what actually happened that night, are also preparing to appear in some form. They're trying to get some lawyers to help them in the whistleblower procedures and so on. But those are two of the important developments. And the third, which I think has helped kind of break this thing loose, took place a couple of weeks ago, but it's still resonating. Over 700 former special operations personnel came forward, wrote a joint letter to every member of the House of Representatives, urging them to endorse and co-sponsor and then vote for House Resolution 36, which has been introduced by Congressman Frank Wolf, and it basically says, look, enough of this fooling around. 5 committees in the Congress alone, and there's several others on the Senate side, have not gotten anywhere near the truth on this issue. We are insistent that happen, and we want a select committee, as this resolution calls for, to have full subpoena power and get the truth out. And so I think that's where things are headed. There are now over 135 members of the House, well over half of the Republican caucus, and there's a rule called the Hastert Rule in the House that says when a majority of the majority wants something, it's supposed to happen. And so we're waiting on House Speaker John Boehner to see his way clear to doing just that. I hope he will, if not before this hearing, then after.
That's a very good point. I hope he does as well. And I have to commend Congressman Issa for really staying to this, because he's tried his best to keep this investigation, to keep trying to find out the facts on what had transpired on 9/11 in Benghazi. And we need answers. And you had an article up on your website, and you asked some very, important questions, and to me they're simple questions that need to be answered. And the first one, where was the president and what was he doing? And Your follow-up explanation is, why didn't we send help? Somebody has to answer that question. How come we sent absolutely no help when you had, at the time, an ambassador and others, you had no idea how many, who were in harm's way, still alive, and yet no help was sent?
Yeah, taking those in order, we know that the President met with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I believe that Hillary Clinton was on the phone with them, but was in any event apprised at the same time as to what was going on when this attack began. I think it was about 5 o'clock East Coast time in the United States. And these two witnesses testified before the first Secretary Panetta left office earlier this year, and described that they met with the President. They had a brief conversation with him about what was happening at that moment, and then they never heard from him again. No direction as to what to do, no orders which were necessary to effect a cross-border operation to mount a rescue or even to bring some force to bear to support these beleaguered Americans. And again, remember, this was something that was discussed with the President at the very beginning of what was basically a two-phase attack. The first against what was initially described as a consulate. It wasn't a consulate. It was a special mission compound, the only one the State Department has in the world, by the way, that we know of. And then about 7 hours later, the attack on the so-called CIA annex that was where the last two Americans were killed as they sought to defend a bunch of others who were seeking shelter there. This is the kind of thing that, again, prompted these special operators to say in their letter to the Congress, we've trained, we've prepared, and in many cases we've executed rescue operations for Americans in harm's way throughout our careers, and we don't understand why there wasn't an order given to try to undertake such a thing in this instance. And that's an answer that I think we deserve, not least because, frankly, guys, perhaps the most important thing to learn from all of this is whether Americans in the future, whether they're men and women in uniform or whether they're State Department personnel, will similarly be abandoned by their government or not.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Leaving people on the battlefield has been that's a trust that is so important to keeping the cohesion of our forces wherever they do battle at any point in the future. Frank, have you ever, in your history, I mean, you've been one of the best stalwarts watching this, have you ever seen a point in time when our government seemed to have done a better job of protecting our enemy and running interference than they have of actually protecting our own people?
Well, I can't recall one that sort of jumps out at me with this particular facet, and that is that the President himself seems to be involved in this protection of the enemy. He, as I say, did nothing to bring force to bear against the enemy. He, both before this incident and quite dramatically after this incident, lied about what went on, notably by, in this case, promoting this whole notion that there's a video that was somehow responsible for the attack. It's simply not so. And we now have a timeline that has been officially generated and only belatedly cut loose, and I think only through a leak to the Weekly Standard, that indicates that as the attack was underway, the government knew that this was spontaneous, it was disciplined, it was organized, it was a military-style operation. And then to try to mislead the American people in this way, at the instigation of senior White House personnel and seemingly senior State Department personnel, is scandalous. So there are certainly other instances where people have made mistakes that have redounded to the benefit of our enemies. So this seems to be, a mistake of the first order, yes, but it almost certainly was intentional in this case, because evidently, well, I don't know the reason why. I can speculate, but for whatever reason, it was helpful to our enemies and seems to have been intentionally so.
Yeah, well, I suspect we're going to find out an awful lot more on Wednesday after the hearings begin and as the testimony comes forth. Now, you had a blog out this morning, in fact, and I can't agree with you anymore that war is coming, and you're referring to Syria, the civil war that's going on over there, and the recent use of chemical weapons and other weapon systems that we need to be concerned about, but not just us, our allies Israel and other neighbors of Syria. And I think you're absolutely correct on this, and I'm curious as to your thoughts of, how and should we become involved in Syria?
I don't think we should become involved in Syria, and I say that with a heavy heart because it's clear that among the people who are being killed are not just various kinds of jihadists, Sunni and Shia, and Syrian military personnel, including some of their best fighters, all of which is basically a good thing as far as I'm concerned, especially that they're killing each other and not embroiling our forces in the midst. But obviously, what causes a heavy heart is that civilians are getting caught in the crossfire. In some cases, they're probably being deliberately targeted. So there is a real human tragedy aspect to this, but that is often the case in war. And I simply believe that the United States will not benefit. Our national security will not benefit were we to become embroiled in this civil war. I don't think that it would spare civilian lives. If anything, I think what we're doing now in terms of arming some of these jihadists, and that's who's getting some of the arms at least, is likely to create more civilian casualties, not less. But what's really, I think, of surpassing importance is that we stand with our friends in Israel who are taking steps as they deem necessary to try to prevent the capacity for mass destruction from spreading beyond Syria to Lebanon and ultimately probably to be used against Israel itself, and maybe us for that matter.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I agree with you. I look at the Middle East as just an ongoing disaster for decades. No matter what side we choose to be on, they don't like us. They always find a reason not to like us. There's no gain to be had. I think we need to, if we do get involved in any situation, not just Syria, we have to have a very clear mission for why it's to our benefit. It's got to be in our national interest, not just the interest of another nation. And then we have to have an end game before we go in, an exact plan of how we're going to go about, who we're going to work with, what we're going to do. And in this case, I think simply we could help support our allies if anything spills over into their territories.
Yeah. Well, one of the places where it is spilling right now, for sure, is into Jordan, with large numbers of refugees coming across those borders and compounding further what I think is the mortal peril to our friend, the little king there, Abdullah. This is again another place where we're likely to see the Muslim Brotherhood at best, and Al Qaeda sorts at worst, and there's really not much difference between the two, frankly, taking hold of some very strategic parts of the world. And when this is all said and done, and this is, I think, something that these hearings on Benghazi Gate and the various inquiries that flow from it must address as well, and that is the policy that the U.S. government has been pursuing under President Obama has been all about empowering, emboldening, legitimating, financing, and even arming, in some cases, people who are sworn to our destruction. This is malfeasance of the first order.
I think that's first and foremost the single most important issue here. But Frank, I have a fundamental question. It feels to me like we're still suffering from decades of propping up and artificially supporting what was really artificial borders, and there's so many forces trying to redraw the borders in the map. Do you get the sense sometimes that this is never going to end until we actually let the local forces play itself out?
Well, that's almost certainly true. we, I think, are a status quo power by nature. We're not, with the notable exception on occasion of feeling the need to intervene to remove a mortal peril to us, as I believe was the case with Saddam Hussein. We're not interested in redrawing borders that were, as you indicated, I think, arbitrarily drawn basically after Versailles. I think I heard you talking about this as I came on the program. This is a throwback to the map making of that period, and a lot of people who had family or cultural or ethnic or religious ties found themselves on the wrong side of borders, and there has been a lot of restiveness ever since. And it certainly seems at the moment that there's going to be a concerted effort to redraw borders. My biggest concern, frankly, is that we're going to see an effort made to eliminate them in the favor of a transnational caliphate, which is the express objective of the Muslim Brotherhood and the various groups that have splintered off of it, including Al-Qaeda. And that will pose real challenges for lots of folks in the region, and certainly for our interests as well.
Well, Frank, very well said. I share your concerns, and maybe interested. We may have a double E ticket ride when we travel to Israel. You know, we'll be traveling with you in late September, early October. But Frank, if you would please give your website where people can reach you at the Center for Security Policy.
Sure. It's securefreedom.org, and you can find out information about the trip, and we're delighted that you guys are going to be with us.
Absolutely, Frank. Thanks so much for appearing, and keep up the good work. You're one of the few out there screaming from the mountaintops the exact message that will keep us safe. So thanks to you and your team for the hard work you do.
Thanks for your help in circulating, and appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Have a great day.